Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. As Sam already said, my name's Robin Fergason. I'm the Planetary Data Officer for the Planetary Science Division, and I'm also the Science Mission Directorate Co-Chair for the NASA Lunar Reference Frame Working Group. So Brent just gave you all a great update on reference systems and the questions and concerns that have been expressed by the surface science and cartography communities. And so in response to this and additional community feedback, multiple directorates are now working together to develop an internal NASA recommendation that meets the needs of our stakeholders. And today I want to give you an update on our activities, but with the understanding that this group is in the middle of this process and we don't yet have any final conclusions to report. But if you could go to the next slide, please. So again, as you heard in the previous talk, currently there are two body fixed reference systems commonly used on the moon. The principal axis system is used to model the gravity field for orbit propagation. It's also commonly used for gravity science investigations. And the mean Earth system is the current standard for mapping and defining surface coordinates as recommended by the IAU and several other groups. And this system is also optimized for surface mapping. It incorporates a no net rotation condition so that changes in the coordinates can be minimized between updates. So we have different communities using different reference frames. And in the past, these communities haven't had many opportunities to work together or understand needs across domains. So a primary motivation is to start having these discussions now. And it's important to have these discussions now because the Moon to Mars architecture and infrastructure discussions are underway, and decisions on standard reference systems that we would use within this architecture need to be made to support that continued development. So the identified need that for standing up this working group, those needs include things like ensuring all stakeholders are included in the relevant NASA discussions, ensuring that all stakeholder needs, requirements, and justifications are clearly and accurately documented. And from the conversations we've been having thus far, it's also clear that ongoing discussions and collaborations are going to be needed. So we're also determining what some of those needed and immediate longer-term actions might be. If you could go to the next slide. So the approach we've taken in our activities up to this point, that includes the following. So in November of 2023, we presented this identified need to the Federated Board for discussion and feedback, and they asked us to develop a plan to address this need. So then in January of 2024, we presented our plan, and the Federated Board stood up a NASA working group to engage stakeholders and technical experts. The tasks given to us by the Federated Board, those include establishing a recommended technical approach for consideration by NASA leadership, and to document this approach in a white paper and a presentation to the Federated Board ahead of the architecture concept review. So what we've done then is to put together a working group that's divided into two teams. And I want to note that both of these teams work really closely and collaboratively together. So the leadership team they've identified some driving use cases, and they're also considering interagency and international aspects of standardization and implementation. This group will also make the formal recommendation to the Federated Board. The technical team is analyzing those driving use cases I just mentioned and discussing assumptions and potential solutions, and they'll deliver technical findings to the leadership team. And I just want to emphasize that even though there are two teams, these two teams work really, really closely and collaboratively together. Next slide, please. So the working group consists of cross-directorate participation to help ensure that all NASA stakeholders are represented. The NASA directorates participating include the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, or ESDMD, the Science Mission Directorate, which includes the Exploration Science Strategy and Integration Office, or SEO, the Planetary Science Division, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It also includes the Space Operations Mission Directorate, which includes the Space Communications and Navigation Program, or SCAN. We're also gathering some initial feedback from stakeholders outside of NASA so that we can take any relevant needs from our interagency partners into account as well. These groups include folks like the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, the U.S. Naval Observatory, the Department of Commerce, and also the National Science Foundation. So we're developing a NASA consensus on a reference system to be used, and this is based primarily on the internal NASA stakeholder needs. And then this recommendation will be presented to groups outside of NASA, such as international standards boards and our interagency, international, commercial, and academic partners. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the goal of this working group, I've already kind of alluded to this, but our goal is to develop an internal NASA consensus on recommended lunar reference systems for very specific use cases. And it's important to have these conversations now because multiple use cases and architectural elements are emerging that require the definition of a lunar reference system. So for example, crewed surface operations require accurate navigation in support of science objectives. And so the architecture to support these activities, that architecture is being designed now. So we need to have robust information to help inform that design. Another example is the delivery of initial radio navigation services and developing specifications for future development of our infrastructure. Some of the constraints that we're working under are listed on this slide, but this isn't an exhaustive list. But first off, we require an unambiguous approach to the use of a lunar reference frame to achieve Objective 4 of the U.S. National Cislunar Strategy, and that's a strategy document that comes out of the White House, and NASA is leading that Objective 4. We also require significant stakeholder engagement to ensure that the approach meets a broad set of user needs, that it maximizes science return and also minimizes the risk to the overall system. And finally, a NASA consensus position is necessary to coordinate a consistent approach in multiple interagency and international forums. If you could go to the next slide, please. So there is progress that I can share with you all today, and we've had positive outcomes so far. So through our discussions, there's been an increased awareness of lunar exploration activities that depend on accurate, consistent, and robust lunar reference systems. So we all understood our own discipline needs really well, but a broader awareness across these different domains is needed to ensure that whatever reference system we recommend to be used will meet all of our exploration needs. Another positive outcome is that education and information has been shared across domains. There's an increased understanding and appreciation of the concerns and needs of various stakeholders, and it's also facilitated a lot of really fantastic discussions that are far more inclusive of all user and system needs than what we had the opportunity to previously discuss. And all of this activity is helping to build bridges between our directorates, which will positively impact Artemis. It'll impact the architecture development and also enhance our lunar exploration activities well into the future. A lot of this Artemis work and the collaborations between different directorates are just getting started. And these bridges and collaborations they're absolutely necessary for meeting the goals, the science goals and exploration goals of Artemis. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the Lunar Reference System impacts groups across NASA, across U.S. federal agencies, international agencies, commercial, academic partners, and many, many more. And so to that end, we recognize that an internal NASA recommendation is only the beginning of this conversation. Continued discussion and opportunities for input include arenas like presenting updates at the PAC, at League, at the IAU General Assembly, and other relevant community meetings. We also will integrate our findings into the ESDMD architecture description document. That document was discussed in some of the earlier presentations this morning. And this topic is relevant to the communication, position, navigation, and timing sub-architecture book, if you all are interested in kind of seeing how these conversations progress. And we also need to coordinate with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Specifically, there's a Cislunar Technology Strategy Interagency Working Group, and that's a forum we'll begin to have some interagency feedback in those interagency discussions. We also need to coordinate with our academic, commercial, and international partners, and we also need to coordinate it with international standards organizations as well. So stay tuned and participate in these discussions as you're able and provide your feedback. Next slide, please. So this working group represents, as I said before, representation from ESDMD, SMD, and SOMD. And the time and effort that these folks are putting into this task is so very, very appreciated. This is my last slide. I thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions in the chat and also during the Q&A session after this next talk. Thank you again.